The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to thomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Thom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book, and it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries, as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I described Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world."
Thom Hartmann Program. Patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice. Believers, Nate? What's going on? Greetings, my friend. Yeah. Hey, I'm seeing audio over there. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And a lot in the news today. Americans protect fairness. Well, first of all, you've got Donald Trump getting ready to blow up the Iran deal. And, we'll see how that goes. And Americans for Tax Fairness are pointing out, stock buybacks climbed to $387 billion yesterday. This is the way that big corporations and billionaires make sure that the tax breaks for corporations turn into extra billions, hundreds of millions, tens of millions, and mere millions in the pockets of stockholders and CEOs and senior executives. In the latest evidence, here it says, that the Trump GOP tax scam was never intended to help working Americans. Stock buybacks climbed to $387 billion yesterday, 58 times more than the $6 billion that corporations have announced or Americans for Tax Fairness estimates will go to workers through one-time bonuses or pay increases. Apple's announcement yesterday of a $100 billion stock buyback program, 333 times more than the $300 million it's promised workers in one-time bonuses, is one of the worst betrayals of American workers yet. Americans for Tax a clear linkage right now between some of the behavior that is coming out of this White House, and specifically that I think has to do with Roger Stone and Richard Nixon. And so, I wanted to get back Lamar Waldron, my old writing partner, and his new book, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination. He and I together wrote Ultimate Sacrifice and Legacy of Secrecy about the Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, and Martin Luther King assassinations.
And Lamar is like one of just the world's leading experts on Watergate and what these guys were up to. Lamar, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, John.
Thanks for joining us. So, political crimes. What are the parallels that you see between Trump's political espionage deal? Here we've got Colin Kahl, and I forget the name of the other guy, but there's two people who worked in the Obama administration negotiating the Iran deal, and it turns out that last year the Trump administration or Republicans hired an Israeli intelligence, an Israeli corporate espionage firm to track down, what's going on with with these two guys who worked for Obama, who negotiated the Iran deal in an attempt to destroy the Iran deal. This is not anything new, is it, Lamar?
Not really, not if you follow American political history. And it actually even goes deeper with some new information that the Guardian had also reported yesterday. So let's look at the reason that the Trump White House was trying to dig up this information. They wanted to basically find some sort of dirt on these people so they could smear these two former officials, from the Obama administration, just so that it would, and who knows what they were hoping to find. They were hoping to find, these people had somehow made money off the deal, or they had some, something in their personal backgrounds that could be embarrassing, that could be used to smear them in public, in the press, and then that would, in the minds of the Trump administration, would make it easier for the Trump administration to then leave that Iran nuclear deal. So the issue here is smearing people for political gain, basically, and that was one of the many things that Trump shared with Richard Nixon, which led me on your show predict that Trump would very likely win. He was using Nixon's old technique of fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smears.
Fibs,
exactly. And that term was coined, by the way, by a Republican senator, female Republican senator back in 1950, to describe the Nixon-McCarthy era. But, Trump picked up the same thing. Fear, create fear, ignorance, spread lies, bigotry. I could go into too much detail there with Trump, and then smears. So that was what was